OCD family community. So good to see you back at the water cooler. My kiddos just went back to school and it's been a jam packed summer, most recently with wrapping up the 29th IOCDF conference in Orlando. And what kind of water cooler chat would this truly be if I didn't have fun pictures to share or even awkward travel stories? So let's get to the good, the bad, and the ugly of it all. Because the humidity, y'all. I start sweating just thinking about it. Oh, it was bad. Faux show. Okay, so let's get started with some positives. On my way into town, I was invited to a din-din with some amazing ICBT clinicians and Dr. Frederick Ardema himself. The good doc joined me at the beginning of season 2 to share more about forging this evidence-based research path. So what a cool opportunity to hang out with him and my expert colleagues. Also, while dining, I bumped into our OCD family friend and colleague, Dr. Anthony Pinto and Dr. Christine Durso. One of the best highlights of attending the conference is meeting and greeting so many virtual friends in person. So this was a treat. Anthony and I met up again later in the conference, and I'm super excited about more episodes that we have planned for supporting obsessive compulsive personality disorder warriors. But the other most exciting highlight of the conference for me is that it's comprised of not just researchers and expert clinicians. It's a gathering of lived experience OCD and OCRD warriors, spouses, parents, children, siblings, kiddos running around, empowered, and more. It's not just us against OCD. It's we all versus OCD. All of us facing this debilitating mental health disorder together. And it's really a beautiful thing. Which also makes me pause on another highlight in attending a great talk with Dr. Alec Pollard, Ben Eckstein, a fierce mama, and previous OFP guest and peer advocate Micah Howe. Fam, as I sat and listened to Micah share his story to a room of grieving yet hopeful parents of adult children with OCD, I was so honored to be captured in the wave of movement Micah created as he spoke heart to heart with attendees. I was proud, encouraged, and honestly, left a little bit speechless. I told him afterward that he should be the keynote speaker. He has my vote because his testimony was so empowering and incredible. Micah came on the podcast in season 1 to share his wish list for things he wished his parents knew about his OCD journey. And fam, I'll have that episode linked over on this episode's blog, along with Ben Eckstein's, who continues to lead the way in caring for parents with adult children suffering with OCD. Another highlight was meeting Miss Erica McCoy, who facilitated a conference-long creativity corner despite being busy as a presenter as well. I got to meet her husband and her kiddos, and it was such a wonderful and beautiful space for everyone, and I just really love this addition to the conference hall. So I hope it can become a regular staple at the conference because it was powerful, and you did great work, Erica. Fam. I even got to meet our VPR girlie, Sheena Shea, who was previously featured during Women's History Month here on the pod as a woman using her platform to slay. Hey. I was on the hot mess express because, again, remember the humidity, fam? But I leaned in and I shot my shot, as the kids say. We talked about her coming on the podcast, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we can work something out. But I appreciated getting a brief chat in. And I'm mostly just grateful for her openness and willingness to talk about OCD as a part of her public platform. This helps to break through stigma, and it lets warriors know that they are not alone. There were a ton of interesting talks, and I wish I could have split myself into multiple pieces and attended more. But one thing that I would have liked to see was more diversity in terms of neurodivergent affirming treatment, more BIPOC representation, and more inclusion of inference-based CBT. Additionally, more focus on disgust-based contamination would be really helpful. I talked to a few lived experience warriors that wondered if they were the odd people out for having these types of struggles. I assured them they are not, and disgust is particularly tricky because the brain does not habituate to discuss stimuli. It lives in the long-term memory. But I will highlight that my friend and prior guest, Rich Gallagher, did recently come out with a new, already trending workbook on his mastery approach for contamination OCD. He talks about it from an anxiety, a disgust, and a sensory perspective. So I'll add Rich's podcast from when he was here on the show, as well as information on his new workbook on this episode's blog as well, because more options for more relief and recovery and treatment, I am all for that. Lastly, as much as I enjoyed the amazing time together, I also left with sadness. In learning about ICBT, the newer 30-year-old treatment on the block, I realize that there is some controversy about having a non exposure option join the ranks with exposure and response prevention, at least here in the States. And as a newbie to this specialty, I also wasn't surprised that there is more than one way to solve a problem. This doesn't make one treatment more effective or not, unless the research can specifically validate that. But even in such cases, some treatments can work for everyone and some don't. Not having options is not a choice. And I am crossing all of my fingers and my toes that 10 years from now, we'll have even more treatment protocols in this discussion. But insofar that there isn't a cure, having treatment options brings more hope, more relief, and increases recovery. Many mental health disorders have many different evidence based practices available. And the truth is, we have some amazing treatment protocols infused with dialectical behavioral therapy or DBT, mindfulness, or ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. Some folks really connect strongly with internal family system approaches, or IFS, or rumination focused ERP, which bridges ERP with the deeper psychoanalytic work, a protocol developed by Dr. Michael J. Greenberg, which has brought amazing breakthroughs to many OCD sufferers. In fact, I had Michael on the show, and that continues to reign supreme as one of my most downloaded episodes from my entire podcast catalog. There's TMS and psychedelics and ketamine research continuing to be studied. And the Biobehavioral Institute, amongst other drug manufacturers, continue to work on clinical trials for new medications and breakthroughs in OCD treatment. To me, this doesn't take away from the greatness or the value that ERP provides. And I'm grateful that we have this established 50-year-old treatment continuing to do great work. I'm even more excited, to be honest, with the emergence of research and work for justice-based ERP or liberation-oriented treatment, because this brings more access and more cultural sensitivity to these important intersections. But as I left the conference, I heard a number of accusations in the days that followed that ICBT lacked deference for ERP, and insinuation that therapists practicing ICBT are telling the community at large that ERP is harmful. And thusly, I've received messages and DMs from you, fam, and I've been asked to address it. So here I am, because that's what family does. We work through shit so we can move through it and into value-driven living. So I'm going to start in addressing the concerns I received about ICBT and the chatter that overflowed from the conference. But then I'm going to get to what I think the real meat of the point is. And so I'll take it in that order. So it's interesting because out of the 3 talks that even made mention of ICBT at this year's conference, which to give the fan perspective was 3 out of 107 total talks at the conference, which isn't counting support groups, youth programming, or even evening programming, I simply did not hear this. And sometimes when I share that sort of thing, people have responded with, just because you didn't hear it doesn't mean it's not true. And while I would contend that that reasoning works the other way around as well, that's generally an unhelpful argument that does little to move us forward. So I'm going to share specifically about what I did hear, family. I heard considerations and treatment selection for OCD, which I believe was the entire point of that particular talk, to talk about different treatments and when or how to decide what evidence-based options are the right fit for us. Because we get to decide, fam. ICBT was included as a treatment modality, not because it demanded or elbowed its way into being there. It was invited, and it was included because, like ACT and ERP, the IOCDF recognized it as an evidence-based treatment option for OCD. Another thing I heard was that ICBT is a non-exposure model. Okay, facts. Next, I heard that ICBT cannot be infused into ERP because it's fundamentally different, which I believe to be true. They function very differently. And this might be a weird and imperfect analogy, but you know how my brain loves a good analogy. So I was thinking about the fact that my kids have ADHD, and a stimulant medication can be prescribed by their medical provider, or a non-stimulant medication can be prescribed, or no medication can be prescribed. One of my kiddos has had experience with all 3. No meds, stimulant, and a non-stimulant. In all of those circumstances, we were treating his ADHD. But if we look at the medication options specifically, head-to-head, a stimulant and a non-stimulant medication have very different mechanisms for how they target ADHD. So to say that a non-stimulant isn't a stimulant and can't function the same way as a stimulant is pretty straightforward. It's not an emotional argument, it's not disparaging the other drug class, it's just a fact. For my kiddo, when a stimulant had a really harsh side effect for him, we chose to transition to a non-stimulant medication, and we were grateful for that option. ICBT not being the same as ERP is just a fact, and that is okay. ICBT having a mechanism of inferential confusion is different than ERP, and that is okay. It doesn't take away from the amazing treatment that ERP provides. Additionally, and similar in the case of my kiddo and ADHD, if someone has a harsh side effect to one form of treatment, that doesn't mean that treatment is harmful. Stimulant medications do amazing work for a lot of ADHD sufferers, but not all. Conversely, SNRIs or no med options can do great for ADHDers, but not all. So if someone has a harsh side effect to, say, ERP, or ICBT, or SSRIs, or any other evidence-based treatments for OCD, does that mean it's harmful? Because if I'm being honest, I think this is where the inference that ERP is harmful, or that was said, is coming from in the first place, and it's simply inaccurate. It's not what was said. What was said was the presenter had an experience in treating POCD, otherwise known as pedophilia OCD. And without getting too caught in the weeds, fam, I'll just clarify that this is absolutely not the same thing as pedophilia. And as they struggled with an ERP exposure, both the client and the therapist, the presenter was told that being an OCD therapist isn't for everyone. Again, the context for the sharing was within a talk about treatment considerations and a situation that, much like with my son, where the stimulant wasn't a good fit, ERP wasn't a good fit. Now, in the situation with my son, we wouldn't go and say to the doctor, well, I guess being a doctor isn't for everyone, just because a stimulant didn't metabolize well for him. And the good news is when it comes to OCD, we don't have to tell the therapist or the client that either. We have options. And this presenter hasn't stopped using ERP, but they discussed how a non-exposure model resonated with them and for their client. Their statement never disparaged ERP, its efficacy, or called it harmful. And since the point of the talk was considering treatment selection in OCD treatment, I appreciate that this presenter showed her work for this specific example. Treatment selection means choices. For my son, it wasn't stimulant or nothing, kiddo. It's not ERP or nothing, warrior. It's not ICBT or nothing, warrior. But ultimately, family, it should be the warrior's choice on what resonates with them. And if a particular client is having a harsh side effect to treatment, we should consider our treatment options that are available. It doesn't mean ERP is harmful. It doesn't mean ICBT is harmful. It means we're people. We react to things differently, and we need to honor that. So as I left the conference, as great as parts of it were, I felt saddened and, frankly, disappointed. And as I sat eating dinner with my family, once we were home sweet home, I looked across the table, multiple members, even within my family with OCD, and I thought, why does there have to be such a fuss? We've used ERP. We've used ICBT. We've used ACT. We've used SSRIs. People want to be able to sit at the table and not feel crippled by their OCD fears. Why this fuss? And as I was chatting with a friend, she pointed out what I think that bigger issue seems to be for me. The bigger issue isn't even about ICBT, fam, but it is about something near and dear to my heart, which I really try to show in every way, and that's inclusion. Because truth be told, I don't need to defend ICBT. I can opine all I want about it, but the 30 years of science and research speaks for itself. Same for ACT. For ERP, I don't have to defend it. My problem is with the lack of inclusion. OCD affects everyone of all races, of all genders, sexualities, ages, religions, you name it. And we have treatment options. Options! And yes, while I do appreciate that the IOCDF accepted some ICBT inclusive talks as a treatment consideration, asking the experts, one of which being an ICBT expert that did such a powerful role play, and even a training on the mechanisms of change in ICBT, 3 out of 107 main conference talks for one of the 3 evidence-based practices endorsed by IOCDF, that's 2.8% of the talks. That's the math. So if the issue is inclusion, there's room for improvement. So for inclusivity, I'll just end with this, fam. I want to take an opportunity to thank the presenters that were at the conference, whether you presented on ICBT or ERP, or maybe you just told a story of learning how to get out of bed in the morning, let alone thrive with your OCD or OCRDs. From my purview, whether intended or not, there was a lot of mudslinging, and I can only imagine how the ICBT presenters felt. But can we remember who the target is here? Who the bully is? Who the enemy is? Because it's these debilitating disorders. I heard folks share amazing and tearful breakthroughs from their treatment of ERP and how it saved their lives. So moving. I heard folks break down in tears at the hope they felt for a treatment option and how ICBT had saved their lives. We are on the same team, fam. Hope, resources, support for all the evidence-based treatments. Inclusivity with neurodivergent affirming care, with BIPOC representation, with LGBTQIA plus affirming justice-based treatment, with choice, liberation-oriented treatment, with ICBT, with ERP, with ACT. That's what we are about here at the OCD Family Podcast, and that is what we will continue to be about. So that is my conference recap. And for the torchbearers facilitating that hope, thank you. If you or your loved one is using ERP, you're welcome here. If you or your loved one is using ICBT, you're welcome here. If you are ACT fans or IFS or RFERP or Mastery Approach peeps, you are welcome here. And if you don't know what any of these letters mean, but you're just trying to stay above water, you're welcome here. Because guess what, fam? We are in this together. We're better together. Let us not forget it.